All right, our last skill in 5.nbt.7 is dividing decimals, or dividing with decimals. We're going to be covering how to divide a decimal by a decimal, or a decimal by a whole number. So I just want to start and kind of show you today how you would divide a decimal by a whole number. So take a look at the example you see here. Hopefully you're noticing right off that in red, that decimal is directly above the decimal in the problem. So the decimal and the dividend, when you look up into the quotient line, the decimal lines exactly up with that. And I hope that kind of reminds you of when we multiplied last week. We did not do that. So it's kind of the opposite of multiplication, but when we added and subtracted, you have to line the decimals up. So I will say probably the most confusing thing about working with decimals is remembering what rule goes with which operation. So just to review, when you add and subtract, you always line up the decimals. You add zeros if you need to fill in the places. When you multiply, you do not line up the decimals. You do not add zeros, and you count what we call DPV, or decimal place value. And how many ever decimal place values are in the two factors that you're multiplying tells you how many decimal place values, or DPVs, have to be in your answer when you're finished. So keeping those rules kind of organized in your mind is going to help you as we move on using all four operations, not just focusing on one at a time. Okay, so when you divide a decimal by a whole number, I like to use a kind of a little fun example and tell you that the first thing you have to do is bring that baby up. So when I look at this problem, I have 54 and 68 hundredths. Now let's get my pen ready. All right, 54 and 68 hundredths divided by 2. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to come right above the decimal in the dividend. Remember, this is the dividend, this is the divisor, and your quotient goes up here on top. So you're going to come right above it, and you're going to just bring, like I like to say, bring that baby up. Now that you've brought your decimal up into your quotient, it's kind of like when we talked about multiplication, and you pretended the decimals weren't there until you were finished with the operation. Then you come back and put in your DPVs. So put in your decimal based on how many decimal place values were in the two factors. So here I'm just going to divide like normal. 2 goes into 5 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. Subtract, bring down. 2 goes into 14 7. 7 times 2 is 14. Subtract, bring down. Notice I did not bring down a decimal. I am done with that decimal. It's in my answer. It's in my quotient. I'm finished with it, okay? I'm dividing just like normal. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 3 times 2 is 6. Subtract, bring down. 2 goes into 8 4 times. 4 times 2 is 8. And there's nothing to bring down. I'm finished. So now I know the answer to 54 and 68 hundredths divided by 2 is 27 and 34 hundredths. And you could still do this just like you do regular division. Go back and take your quotient, which was 27 and 34 hundredths, and multiply it by 2. And you should get 54 and 68 hundredths if you've done it correctly. Okay, let's try just a few to get the hang of how this works. We'll start with 7 and 56 hundredths divided by 3. First step, bring that baby up. I'm finished with my decimal. I've put it in the quotient. I'm done with it. If you need to, mark it out here so you don't try to bring it down into your work. Just kind of get rid of it. Okay, now let's divide. 3 goes into 7 twice. 2 times 3 is 6. Subtract, bring down. 3 goes into 15 5 times. 5 times 3 is 15. Subtract, bring down. 3 goes into 6 twice. 2 times 3 is 6. And we are finished. Nothing else to bring down. So 7 and 56 hundredths divided by 3 is 2 and 52 hundredths. I apologize if that's a little off the screen there. Let's try this next one. 89 and 25 hundredths divided by 5. Remember the first step? bring that baby up. Once you're done with it, mark it out if you need to. You don't have to, but I just don't want you to bring that decimal down. We don't bring it down in our work. Just like in multiplication, we don't bring the decimal down when we're finding our partial products. You just leave it alone. 5 goes into 8 once. 1 times 5 is 5. Subtract, bring down. 5 goes into 39 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. Subtract, bring down. 5 goes into 42 8 times. 8 times 5 is 40. Oops. Subtract, bring down. And 5 goes into 25 5 times. 5 times 5 is 25. And we're finished. So we know that 89 and 25 hundredths divided by 5 is 17 and 85 hundredths. Now remember, you can go back and check these just by doing the inverse operation or multiplication. Okay, this last page is just a reminder. Anytime you divide a decimal by a whole number, bring the decimal point up to the quotient line before you even start the problem. Then just divide like you always do. Now, here is your assignment for tomorrow. I would like for you to bring into class to me one problem that you or someone at your house has made up that involves dividing a decimal by a whole number. I want you to have it worked. Show me that you know how to bring that baby up and that you know not to bring that decimal down in your work. So one problem is all I'm asking you to do. Bring that to me tomorrow completely worked and ready to practice more with dividing decimals by whole numbers. Have a great evening.